Next, special edition of the CSIS Capital Cable with Korea Bureau Chief of the Wall Street Journal, Timothy Martin, to discuss impeachment, machinations of all things political on the Korean Peninsula. 30-minute special next. Coming at you. All right, good evening to those of you in Korea. Good day to those of you around the world, and good morning to those of you in Washington, D.C. I'm Mark Lippert, your host and moderator of a very special edition of the CSIS Capital Cable, 103rd edition to be precise. But again, a special off-cycle 30-minute edition to discuss and analyze the fast-moving events related to impeachment and all things politics in South Korea. And with us, very special guest, friend of the show, friend of mine, great journalist, Wall Street Journal Bureau Chief in Korea, Timothy Martin. Tim, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, great. I go over your long and prestigious bio, but it's on the website, and we've only got 30 minutes, and it would take 29 minutes and 30 seconds otherwise. So that's our issue here today.
Let's jump in.
All right, excellent. Of course, we've got Victor Cha. Everybody knows Victor. I won't go through his bio, but Victor, welcome to the show. You're also ready, as Tim says, to jump in as well, correct?
Absolutely. Let's go.
All right, let's do it. All right, deadly serious topic. We had a ton of viewer interest, which prompted us to do this special edition. We also had a lot of comments in the YouTube channel. Please keep those up. We encourage discourse. One of the comments talked about the lack of a holistic picture. Look, we're doing our best here. This is a 30 to 45 minute show. It's like a Cliff's Notes version of Dostoevsky, right? You got to read it, you got to analyze, you got to reread it. There's a lot to pull back here, but we're going to do our best in 30 minutes. Keep the comments coming, keep the discourse going, and I encourage everybody to do more independent research and talk with friends, neighbors, relatives about this very important issue. All right, Timothy, let's go to you. Just please bring us up to speed on what's going on. A lot happened in the last few days, but please, the floor is yours.
Well, I'll extend the literary metaphor here. I've talked to people on both sides, the ruling party, Yoon and his conservatives, and certainly the opposition. And they'll say things, this seems like a K-drama, all of this entire saga. It seems like a movie. And I think we can actually break it down into 3 acts, if you will, if I don't belabor this literary reference too much. But the first act, we have pretty clear battle lines established between Yoon's conservatives and the opposition. It's a very contentious political environment. You see a political paralysis, a slew of lawsuits back and forth. The two sides don't like each other. And Yoon comes in as a career prosecutor. He's not a politician. There was really no attempt by him to try and create a bipartisan environment. He refused to sit down with the opposition leader, Lee Jae-myung, for years. And you see, scandals emerge on both sides, including the first lady with the Dior bag, excuse me. So we see this just sort of endless pugilistic politics that keeps cresting and cresting. And that takes us to the close of the first act with Yoon and his stunning decision on December 3rd to declare martial law. In the second act, we see really scenes out of a film that many South Koreans didn't want to see, of lawmakers scaling fences, military trying to break into the National Assembly. We see a quick vote to nullify Yoon's martial law. He lifts it. And that kicks off a whole range of deep thinking within the country, international attention, mass protests in the street. And that takes us through the end of the second act where, there's a failed impeachment vote in week 1, more backlash against Yoon, his inner circle. Some of them are detained and arrested. I'm trying to speed through this. And then we see the close of the second act, which is Yoon being impeached on Saturday. And that required some members of his ruling party to cross rank, to break rank, and to vote with the opposition. They needed a 2/3 vote in South Korea's unicameral 300-seat legislature. They got more than 200 votes. And now we're on the cusp of the start of this third act, at least the third act of this chapter of South Korea's diplomacy, where we have some very interesting dynamics. President Yoon has been unpopular. I think his approval rating is actually in the single digits now, before he was impeached. But unlike impeachments of the past, I think even Yoon's detractors, his biggest detractors, would acknowledge that he possesses one elite skill. And Yoon, before he became president, was prosecutor general, was a career prosecutor. His elite skill is his knowledge of the South Korean legal system and the Constitution. And it's this very skill that will decide whether his presidency survives or dies. And Yoon is in the process now of assembling an all-star legal team, and he's going to be trying to make a case that his move to declare martial law was not a crime, as the opposition and prosecutors are pursuing, but rather an act of governance, and therefore not subject to the crimes that he might face. So we're in this process now of how does Yoon frame the argument? Can he successfully frame the argument? But he's not a career politician. He's a career prosecutor. So he's sort of uniquely skilled at coming at this challenge. And we'll see if the Constitutional Court upholds this. So they have 6 months to review the case. Past precedent suggests they'll do this in a matter of months. If the Constitutional Court, which basically serves as the U.S. Senate for an American impeachment, the House takes the first step, National Assembly here takes the first step, goes to Constitutional Court in South Korea. If they uphold the impeachment, then Yoon will be ousted from office. That kicks off a snap election within 60 days. In the interim, Yoon's presidential powers are temporarily suspended. He's vowed to fight until the end. Yoon is vowed to fight until the end. Now South Korea has an acting president, Duck-soo. He's a former U.S. ambassador. He's Harvard educated, career civil servant, but not someone with a presidential background that we've seen before. So this is a crazy moment for South Korean politics. It'll remain chaotic as we turn into 2025.
All right, outstanding. Tons of threads to pull on there. Tim, you did not disappoint per normal. And let me dive into a couple of these things because there's like 5 or 6 buckets I want to touch on here. First, on the court itself. The court is a legal body, right? And it has to consider legal arguments. But like the Senate, it's also, there are political forces at work here, right? And recalling the 16 episode of impeachment, one thing that analysts looked at closely was how big the vote was in the assembly in terms of influencing the court's ultimate disposition. Can you talk us through about that part of it right now in terms of the vote itself, Yoon's popularity framing the court's decision-making process?
Yeah, I think when you talk to former judges, they will acknowledge that they are aware of public sentiment. I think by the end, more than 90% of South Koreans in polling said they wanted Yoon out of office. The vote was, cleared the 2/3 majority at National Assembly. I don't believe it was as large as the impeachments from the past, including 2016. But the minutia of the court is a bit interesting. There are 9 judges. Currently, only 6 are in place. So there are 3 vacancies. There's a mixture. If you look across the 9, the president can appoint some of them, but the 3 empty seats, due to some of this political paralysis that we were talking about earlier, are nominated by the National Assembly. So 2 of those will come from the opposition, 1 from the ruling party. Don't expect, when you talk to opposition lawmakers, don't expect much turbulence or a holdup there with the judges. So that they should be in place in a matter of weeks. The court has tried to start the process. They've tried to issue papers to Yoon, but he's not accepted them. So they're trying to figure out, do they post it on a billboard publicly to start the shot clock? Are there other means? Prosecutors, investigators have tried to get into the presidential compound, but the security detail, in effect, Secret Service of South Korea, they're obligated by the Constitution to protect the president. So there's not been full access. But yeah, I don't know if there's like a quantifiable amount we could say that the judges are going to bend to the public will here they still need to review the case on its merits. But the legal experts we've spoken with think it is a very strong case to uphold impeachment.
Gotcha. All right. Excellent. You beat me to the punch a little bit on the machinations of the court. I had a constitutional law professor who once said social change causes legal change, which reinforces social change. So maybe similar dynamics at work here. Next question, I'm going to then come to Victor here after this, is talk to us about what happens in the interim, right? In terms of what is now acting President Duck-soo doing in this vacuum, as it were, in this unusual circumstance? How is he handling the state of affairs? What does it mean in terms of both domestic and foreign policy for South Korea?
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty still. I think the message from the South Korean government in recent days, they would just like everything to return to normal as much as possible. But if I could throw a sports metaphor on top of the literary metaphor that we went with earlier, I think South Korea, if they had their way, this administration would sort of treat what happened with the martial law decree as a bit of a twisted ankle. Now, I think in reality, talking to diplomats here, it's more of a ligament tear. Now, of course, that means it's not career ending by any means, but there's damage done. There's going to be time needed to heal. And I will say, for much of the fallout from the martial law decree initially, it was radio silence, both for journalists and diplomats. They didn't know who was in charge. They would send in, requests for meetings and not hear back. The U.S. and South Korea canceled like nuclear consultative group meetings, tabletop exercises. Lloyd Austin was supposed to be in Seoul last week, I believe. Those all went away. There was a visit by Sweden's prime minister that got scrapped almost just the day or 2 days before. So there was a suspension of diplomacy and security as this leadership vacuum existed. But after the impeachment, Yoon said, I'm going to hand over power. I'm not going to fight it. I'm not going to make it murkier than it already is. Duck-soo has been acting president since Saturday. He spoke with Biden on the phone. There's been a resumption of, I think Lloyd Austin spoke with his South Korean counterpart just in the past day or so. And there's, I think Kurt Campbell mentioned that there is going to be a resumption of high-level meetings between Seoul and the Biden administration in the final weeks. So I think we're on a pathway back to normal, but there's still a gap from where it was December 2nd before martial law.
All right, outstanding. And I would just say, Duck-soo not only was ambassador to the U.S., has twice served as prime minister, I think finance minister, also was in charge of an environment NGO, KITA. It's precisely why in a cable I once called him the ubiquitous Duck-soo, and he's living up to his reputation there. All right, Victor, over to you. Your thoughts on the unfolding events here.
First, great coverage by Timothy Martin Tae-Kija. Really nice job. Well done. That's gonna be what I call you from now on. On the K-drama reference, first thing is I'm going to claim intellectual property over that because I actually have an article coming out in the Atlantic today and the title of it is a real life K-drama. So anyway, so first on the Constitutional Court, I'm sorry, Mark, I don't mean to ask questions, but I had one question, which is that regardless how quickly they may try to work and whether they can actually start work before they bring the three judges on, like can they walk and chew gum at the same time? Can they like continue to do the work while they're bringing three judges on? The other thing is that if it extends into April, my understanding is that two of the judges, particularly two of the ones that were appointed by former President Moon, would rotate off the court, and then so what would happen there, like if it went that long? And then the second point, I just very quickly is I entirely agree with the information vacuum. I mean, it was, talking to friends and others, it was really quite remarkable that nobody could get any information out of what was going on in Seoul for a period of time there. And then eventually they designated, the channel of information to be the foreign ministry and the foreign minister. But even then, the information was so spotty and so bad. That was not a good period of time, I think, for all of us who were watching this. The only thing I'll add, Mark, is that I know for many they may wonder like, why does this happen all the time in Korea? Like, why, this is the third president who's been impeached, right? One of Roh Moo-hyun was impeached and reinstated. Park Geun-hye, as we all know, was impeached, and then Constitutional Court ousted her. The fate of Yoon is to be determined. And part of it is this, fight to the death political culture in Korea. But part of it's also structural, right? I mean, single 5-year presidential term, right, makes every president vulnerable after a bad midterm election or halfway, once they pass the halfway mark in their presidency, all of them are very vulnerable. And then second, as you guys know well, for over 3 decades, only 1/3 of the electorate each defines themselves as progressive or conservative, and the rest are kind of in the middle, undecided or moderate, which means almost every time a president comes into power and they don't have a popular mandate, right? They have maybe a little more than 1/3. I mean, right? They win with like 34% of the vote or something. And so that also makes them vulnerable. It doesn't help that Yoon had a leadership style that pissed everybody off. That was clearly the case. But all of these things, a confluence of things, create this situation that we have today.
And before Tim answers your very good questions, Victor, I mean, I guess what I would say also is, I think Americans are now more familiar, I'd say, sadly, in my own personal view, with impeachment here in the U.S., right? We've now had 3 and 30 years, right? 30 plus years, right? So what is less covered is all of the impeachment actions against Yoon's cabinet, right? And we had that here in the US, right, with our Homeland Security cabinet official, right, secretary, and that was virtually unprecedented, right? I think one other instance in 100 years. So there's, to underscore your point, you've got these, what I would say, cabinet level impeachments that are also emblematic of, a highly, I would say, polarized and competitive political system defined by some structural elements that you outlined as well. All right, Tim, over to you in terms of, could you field Victor's questions for us, please?
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback on what you're just saying, I mean, it's a ruthless politics in South Korea that I think has only worsened since the last impeachment. But to address Victor's question, yes, they can walk and chew gum at the same time. So with 6 sitting judges, they can proceed with starting the impeachment case. I think they plan to do so by the end of this month, if I'm recalling. But actually the exit of some of these Moon-appointed judges is cited by the sort of legal experts and former judges we've spoken with as sort of a motivation for them to move quickly with the case. So April is 4 months away. Park Geun-hye took 3 months. Roh Moo-hyun, which was where the court actually blocked the impeachment and reinstated Roh, took 2 months. So the legal experts, constitutional experts we've spoken with think it could actually happen closer to that Roh timeline, 6 weeks to 8 weeks. We haven't yet seen Yoon's full hand in terms of his legal defense. You have to imagine, I mean, he's, an elite expert on the knowledge of the South Korean Constitution. So he might have something up his sleeve. He sort of vaguely said, I made this martial law decree out of national security, out of there was a national emergency. He hasn't necessarily textured that much in, but I think that'll be the substance of his defense.
Let me come back to you, Tim, on one other point, which is there are separate law enforcement driven investigations by the Office of the Prosecutor underway as well. I think the acting president was questioned recently. And I think President to the side, Yoon Suk Yeol, I guess, president in suspension, is, I think, coming under questioning as well in the near future, or could come under questioning. What happens with this track, and how does that play into the overall impeachment / removal from office proceedings?
Yeah, yeah. Technically, he could be arrested. He'd be the first sitting South Korean president to go behind bars. as the Constitutional Court review of the impeachment unfolds. But it just seems, given the ability for President Yoon and his team to sort of block access to key materials, to his phone, to even get him in front of prosecutors, that seems like a lower likelihood. Now, he is protected from a lot of these charges through presidential immunity. Now, one of the exceptions is insurrection. So that is not covered by presidential immunity. I think, look, politically speaking, and of course, it's not just the prosecutors, there's police, there's actually a special division in South Korea's law enforcement that investigate only high-ranking officials. So there's different streams of cases, different that are being pursued against Yoon and his cabinet members. I think, and they're of course very sensitive to public sentiment and the politics. So if they go after Yoon and let's just say the court does not issue the arrest warrant to keep Yoon behind bars, that'll backfire. That won't look good. And if you think of a scenario where Yoon is ousted from office, he loses his presidential immunity. So he'd be far more vulnerable to any type of legal case brought against him by the prosecution. And I will say, Yoon, one of his, someone who's akin to a spokesman for Yoon at this moment, not officially, but more or less, came out and said that Yoon would appear in court publicly to explain his case. But he was more ambiguous if he would ever agree to sit down with prosecutors.
Gotcha. Okay. Outstanding. There's about 5 minutes left, and I want to look forward a bit in terms of the incoming Trump team, right? I think I'll put aside and we'll save for another episode. There are critiques out there of the Biden administration handling the relationship that are, I think, important for us to discuss, but I think at another time and place. Let's go to the Trump side. Victor made the point last time that at the precise moment when there are heads of state, CEOs, important figures on the international stage, going down to Mar-a-Lago, meeting with the incoming team, most notably and most importantly, the incoming president himself, to shape and or try to guide policies, especially in the first 100 days or first 100 hours, as Victor said last time. There's an absence of a head of state, head of government in South Korea, or at least one that is permanent. What's the thinking in South Korea on that issue?
It's, obviously there's a huge debate internally in the country who's going to be the next leader. Is it going to be opposition head Lee Jae-myung? Or does somehow Yoon hold on, or does a conservative take charge? So there's a question mark now. And again, to your point, Ambassador, it's not a great time to have a lack of clarity at the top of the country. I will say, if we end up with a snap election and Lee Jae-myung, the left-leaning Lee Jae-myung becomes president, his policies or his party's policies actually align well with Trump's worldview. We interviewed Lee Jae-myung about 10 days ago, and he said he backs Trump's view on exiting Ukraine. He certainly backs Trump's presumed interest in sitting down again with Kim Jong-un. He said if he sees progress in those areas, that he and his party would actually nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize themselves, which paradoxically, again, they're coming from the left. Trump, obviously conservative. But as we saw with the Moon administration and the first Trump administration, there is some overlap there. I think if it becomes a bit dicier if you imagine a scenario where Yoon somehow holds on to the presidency, but then he's going to have this sort of stain to his administration. Questions: will he be arrested? Will he have to resign under pressure? Yes, Yoon was great for the U.S.-Korea alliance, but it would also bring some unique challenges too if he's somehow able to stay.
Okay, just a couple of quick go backs here running out of time. First, you don't have to please don't call me ambassador. I only make my kids call me your excellency. But the other quick thing to add here on this is perhaps labels of left, right, center don't always apply to cross-Pacific comparisons. between Washington and Seoul, especially in the cases of these two politicians. Perhaps it's more populist nationalist versus internationalist type of labels, and there might be more overlap there. And then second, just in terms of over to Victor. Victor, your thoughts, because obviously you've got trilateral issues, you've got Korea on the world stage, you've got other parts of the global agenda as well. Full stop there.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously there are many things to worry about with regard to this political crisis, but on the foreign policy side, the thing that worries me the most is that regardless of how he was perceived at home, Yoon's foreign policies were widely admired around the world, including in the United States, but also in Europe. Whether it was the trilateral or the supply chain work, the Chips 4, or Ukraine, participating in the G7, NATO Indo-Pacific 4. I mean, in general, I think objectively we can say that those policies were widely welcomed around the world at a time when the world was in crisis and they needed countries like Korea, big democracy, 13th largest economy in the world, to step up, right? And that was happening. The concern now is that this impeachment, even if he's ousted from office, would politicize some of those policies. And we saw that initially in the first impeachment motion, you'll all remember, in which they actually singled out his policy towards Japan as an impeachable offense, which, I think doesn't make any sense. They took it out in the second motion. I think they got the message. But still, the way politics are in Korea, one worries that that the successor, if it's a progressive government, would step back from those things, as Jack mentioned, whether it was on Ukraine or on other sorts of issues, and that wouldn't be good for Korea. The leadership vacuum also is huge. I mean, we all think acting President Han is a good person, a supreme technocrat, completely apolitical, had worked for both sides, right, progressives and conservatives. But like Donald Trump is not going to meet him, right? Donald Trump is not going to meet him. He's not going to be the future leader of the party, and all of it's going to have to be done through, the foreign minister or through the national security advisor. But that's not going to work with a Trump administration, right? You have to meet the president.
Right, very fair. All right, next. Look, we're at it. We're basically at time. Tim, closing thoughts to you. Anything else we should be looking forward for in the future?
I just piggyback on Victor's last thought there. I mean, if we go back to the imagery of that Camp David summit with Yoon, Biden, and Ishiba, we might be within just 18 months or so, all of them removed from office or gone. And I think, obviously, with Trump coming in, all of the trilateral relationship with Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington, that might have had a different flavor or texture to it anyways. A changeover in South Korea's presidency, right, would only exacerbate that.
Very fair. I'll just pick up on that thread and say I'm a bit of a glass half full on this, having lived through it, in that, look, there was the Comfort Woman deal, there was the Jisomia deal. Both of those ultimately remained intact, right? And then were built on going forward. And I think this Camp David summit was great, but I also think we weren't starting from zero there either, right? And I think there is more recognition this time that those things are important and are worth, I would say, protecting, especially from the U.S. front. When I think, the last time around, I think the U.S. was not as focused on this set of issues when the Trump team came in. I think they're more focused on it this time. That gives me, I'm a eternal optimist. So that gives me some optimism and hope for the holiday season. So there you go. But I would say the critical element here, and I'll end, is time. We can't backslide here. It's an incredibly important, highly charged geopolitical environment, and time is one thing we don't necessarily have here. So, all right, I see nods. For once I got it at least right with this audience. I'll stop there. I'll quit while I'm ahead. Thanks to both for a quick 30-minute episode here, and happy holidays, Tim, Victor, all of that. Great episode. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.